Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and even earn money, all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify, and when you want to take conversations with your fans to the next level, Q&A and polls are the best way to get them talking. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions, and best of all, it's totally free. I highly recommend you give it a try. Download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started today.
Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk. Big Ten, Big Ten, Big Ten, football talk.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Guggenheim. We're going to recap Week 12, get you ready for Rivalry Week. Make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify. You know the deal. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us. Make sure you like, subscribe, leave a review. Send me emails, big10footballtalk@gmail.com, as well as find me on Twitter and Instagram. Big Ten Football Talk is the handle. Excited to kind of get into this. A lot of teams that deserve a lot of compliments and some teams that I feel like I have issues with, that's pretty much my issue every week. I'm gonna go how I've done it in the past with power rankings, kind of guiding the discussion, and then I'll do our national top 10 as well. I'm gonna start at the top because I think the top is easy, but I've made a switch since a couple weeks ago at the top spot. My number one team right now, and this is not indicative of who I'm going to pick in the game, but my number one currently by a hair is Ohio State. I think Ohio State the past 2 weeks has looked like the best team in the Big Ten. I think TreVeyon Henderson is hitting a groove. I think Ohio State's getting healthy. I think they're finally learning how to call the game well for Kyle McCord. Now, part of that I think is they faced two borderline non-functional teams the past 2 weeks. And, I think Kyle McCord last week in particular against Minnesota got away with a couple balls, but they have looked better against those two teams. And I think I like where they're headed going into the game. Conversely, I don't like how Michigan has looked the past 2 weeks. Yankee Wolverine and I were going back and forth on Twitter about them versus Penn State. And I feel like the same issues I saw with Penn State, I saw this week. I thought Michigan looked vulnerable, which I had not seen all year. And part of that is I think at times they struggle to run the ball. Now, before anyone gets on me and says, what do you mean? Like, look at those big runs. And that was part of what Yankee Wolverine was talking to me about on Twitter. And I appreciate that thought. I think my struggle, and this is in comparison to last year, is if you look at last year, I mean, they were always gashing people. I mean, you could find 6 to 8 runs that were 10 plus yards every year. They were easily getting 5 to 7 yards a clip in most games. I mean, you could not stop them. I have not gotten that sense in the past 2 games. I thought against Penn State, I thought they had, certainly a few runs that were big, but really they controlled the clock, sure, but they lack explosion. And if you look at how Michigan has won the past couple years, particularly against Ohio State, they've been able to explode for big plays in the run game. And they've had a couple. But I think they're vulnerable. I don't think their offense is nearly as effective as maybe we thought they were in the first 10 games or first 9 games. Their defense at times looked shaky against Maryland. Right? I think Maryland really did themselves in, and I think Michigan got bailed out. At first I thought the intentional grounding call was a good call. Looking back, I'm like, I don't think that was a good call. I think Michigan got bailed out. I think they got a little lucky against Maryland. So because of that, I'm dropping Michigan to 2 by a hair. Because as I think, I'm gonna drop the recap, or not the picks pod on Wednesday instead of Thursday. I would still pick Michigan, but I am in doubt. I'm in turmoil over that pick right now. So I've got Michigan 2. Penn State is clearly 3. Penn State's clearly 3, and regardless of what you feel, Penn State's lost to the number 2 and number 3 teams in the country, both by single digits. We could talk about how they've got to win those games in the future, and I still am not sold on Franklin. I'm not sure that they can continue to move on with him unless if they figure something out for offense. But they're very clearly number 3, and they did what they needed to do. Drew Aller went down with an injury in this game. I think they play Michigan State next week. I don't think it matters who they play at quarterback against the Spartans. No offense to Michigan State, who I think has had a really good 3 weeks, despite the fact that they lost to Ohio State a couple weeks ago. They're 2-1 the last couple weeks, and good for them. But I think Penn State's defense is too good. I think their defense again really shut down an inspired Rutgers team, which I'll get to Rutgers. I know Rutgers has lost 3 straight, and that's probably very sad and disconcerting for Scarlet Knights fans after a 6-2 start. But I want to get to them in a minute. Clearly, Penn State's the number 3 team. It's the number 4 team. They beat 31-0. So to me, that top 3 is very easy. Number 4 is very easy, and it's Iowa. Iowa again won a close game against Illinois at home. They rallied in the fourth quarter. Caleb Johnson had a 30-yard touchdown run. So, as much as we've made fun of Iowa's offense, their offense came through in a big way at the end of a game. And I feel like I need to give some flowers to Kirk Ferentz. Because as much as I have ripped him, and I think a lot of people have ripped him for his offensive production and for nepotism, having his son as the offensive coordinator who has not really done a good job in that role, I think the fact that they went 9-2, they won the West. Say what you want about the West. The West is a mess. But they have done a good job to win and to win the games in front of them. In a lot of ways, they probably should be 10-1 based off of what happened against Minnesota. They're 9-2, and I think that defense is going to give Ohio State or Michigan at least some resistance. I don't think it's going to be close in the Big Ten championship game, but you catch Ohio State or Michigan on an off day, who knows? And Kirk Ferentz deserves a lot of credit for that, as he's done all his career, is taken unappreciated, unheralded program and made them a top 20 team in the country. And so he deserves a lot of credit. Those kids deserve a lot of credit for rallying and playing and winning these games. I know they're close. It's ugly, but good for them and good for Iowa to clinch a spot in the Big Ten championship game. They're my number 4 team. Number 5 is Rutgers. I'm still high on Rutgers. They're 6-5. There's a lot of 6-5 and 5-6 teams in the Big Ten. I think Rutgers they unfortunately had a very tough stretch in the back half of their schedule. And so I think people, particularly against Iowa, I think people were like, we kept it close against Ohio State for a good chunk of that game. We went into halftime with the lead against Ohio State, and we can't score a point against Iowa. I think there's just a reality that when you're building a program and you have Ohio State, Iowa, and Penn State, and 2 of those are on the road, right? You have Ohio State at home, and you lose that game, and you get gutted, and then you have to go on the road to Iowa, and then on the road to Happy Valley. That's like not many teams are going to do well in that stretch. And so if I'm a Rutgers fan and you feel beat down and you feel like, we could have broken through. Listen, remember, I said this a few weeks ago. You hit the layups, which means you're bowl eligible. So good job. This was, 6-6 was a successful season. Anything on top of that is bonus. And I still think you can get the bonus win. They play Maryland this week. Maryland is obviously up and down. And we'll talk about them in a minute. But Rutgers, I still think Rutgers should be very proud of themselves, right? They played Penn State tough for 3 quarters. It took the fourth quarter for Penn State to pull away. They have been in it with all the big 3 teams at least well into the second half, right? That's significant progress. And if you're Rutgers, that's what you want to be looking for, is significant progress. And, I think Wimsatt is making strides. I know people are like, well, if we had an actual quarterback. Listen, Wimsatt's raw. You knew that going into it. But he's going into year 4 of the program. He has gotten better every year. He is dynamic as a runner. I think that's probably the biggest thing is they got to do QB run more. But that defense is good. The culture is being instilled. I still think good things are ahead for this Rutgers team, not just for this year, but beyond. Credit Greg Schiano for that. And speaking of credit, can we talk about some Northwestern love at number 6? Northwestern is going to a bowl game. I picked Northwestern to go 1-11, I think. They're 6-5 with an interim, no longer an interim head coach. David Braun, I get Purdue has not been very good this year, but forget that. Northwestern is 6-5. I believe they are second in the division. That's insane, right? Ben Bryant has played well. Sullivan has played well in relief. Cam Porter had a great game, 95 yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, they are doing really well. Granted, Purdue did not have Hudson Card, but still, wins are wins when you are especially when you're Northwestern. Northwestern had no momentum. They had lost a generational head coach. They were coming off 2 terrible seasons. Nobody thought they were going to be good. And they're 6-5. Second in the division. I don't care that it's the West. I don't. They deserve, David Braun and those kids deserve so much credit to go 6-5. And so well done for the Wildcats. I've got them number 6. And a big part of it is they've beaten teams that you wouldn't have expected them to beat. They beat Maryland. They beat Wisconsin, right? And that matters. So good for them. Good for David Braun. He deserves Coach of the Year. No offense, I think Greg Schiano, I think in any other year would deserve it. What David Braun has done in Evanston is nothing short of miraculous. So kudos to David Braun and his guys for staying together and getting this thing done. It's just incredible coaching job. Number 7, I have Maryland. Maryland, they're 6-5, 3-5 in the conference. This is a team I thought that could get to 9 wins. And I was talking to my mom about this. Maryland really took it to Michigan. I think in a lot of ways Maryland could have won this game. And I think that's the frustrating thing about Maryland is coulda, woulda, shoulda. They blow more opportunities than any other team. And on the broadcast, someone, I think it was Joel Klatt, was saying that it's because of Mike Locksley that Maryland has a future. I completely disagree. Maryland blows more opportunities than any other team in the Big Ten. They have talent. They have experience. But they blow games and they blow opportunities. They had Ohio State on the ropes. And, I thought they kind of blew it. I think Ohio State won that game. I think they really rallied. And I think against Michigan, honestly, they should have beat Michigan. They had every opportunity, and they turned the ball over, and they make stupid mistakes when you least need it. And before anyone says, well, but Maryland kept it close. Yeah, but you know what? They didn't keep it close in other games. And this is I say all the time on this podcast, you are who you are. This is what Mike Locksley has done for the past several years. You start hot, you beat some low-level teams, you keep it close against the big boys, and then you blow games you shouldn't. Right? You lose to Illinois. You lose to Northwestern. And no offense to either of those teams, but Maryland's more talented than both of them. They let Ohio State beat them 3 times. And then they get crushed by Penn State. I have no trust in Maryland. And that's sad because I think they could have been the 4th best team in the conference. I think they could have gotten to 10 wins this season. This is a disappointing season for the Terrapins. And you have to look at Mike Locksley. He's done a great job recruiting. That's part of coaching. But the MO is the MO. And at some point you have to figure out, is this kind of our ceiling with Mike Locksley? So I got Maryland at 7. I've got Wisconsin at 8. It's hard to be upset with Luke Fickell in his first year. I expected more, but, good for them to win in overtime against a division rival. That being said, they have to recruit and inject some more talent into this program. It stinks that they don't have Ches Malusi. It stinks that, Braylon Allen has been hurt. He did come back for this game. Had 2 touchdowns in this game. But I think Wisconsin is a gritty team, but they're not a very particularly good team right now. And, they're going to get to a bowl game. They're going to get some extra bowl practices. They're going to be able to keep that system growing in the system. So it's just hard to tell. I thought Wisconsin would be a lot better this year. They're 6-5. They went bowl eligible. Sometimes to get better, you have to break things down before you build them back up. and I think in some ways that might be the case with Wisconsin, is they're making such a radical shift in who they are offensively that it might take some time for them to really get right. So, it's year one under Fickle. I think to get to bowl eligibility, it's certainly not the goal that they had at the beginning of the season, but I think it's good. I look forward to seeing what things look like in the future for them. So I've got Wisconsin at 8. I've got Nebraska at 9. I know there's a lot of people upset about Nebraska losing this game to Wisconsin. Probably felt like shades of Scott Frost, losing, after being up 2 scores. And I say similar things about Nebraska that I do to Wisconsin. It's year one under Matt Rule. They've made strides. They've lost the past 2 games by 3 points and now overtime. And now they've got a tough one to get to bowl eligibility against Iowa. Regardless of what happens against Iowa, I would just stress patience. You're reshaping a culture, and Matt Rule has already shown you that he's got the goods, right? 5 wins, that's more wins than last year. He needs time and he needs talent, right? And so I do question if they need to get a different offensive coordinator, but the reality is they don't have a good option at quarterback right now. Harburg and Sims and Purdy, like all those guys, they're either young and inexperienced, or they just are not talented enough to win consistently at this level. And that's just part of it. And you got to find your guy. And I think that's a big part of this right now. But it's year one. I still think you got to give Nebraska a lot of credit for where they're at. They're 5-6. They have a chance to get bowl eligible. And so the Iowa game it's certainly not the game you want to end with if you're trying to get bowl eligible. At the same time, it's a home game, and you're still in the bowl picture at the end of the season. And that's saying something for Nebraska. So good for them. I'm going to go to Illinois. Illinois, again, a tough loss for Illinois. Now they have to beat Northwestern next week, which that's I think a bit more winnable. But again, no idea if Altmaier plays the backup quarterback who's played fairly well in their games that he's been in. I think Illinois has a real shot. John Paddock has been their quarterback. Less than 50% completion percentage against Iowa. But again, it's Iowa. He didn't turn the ball over. He didn't turn the ball over. Threw for 215 yards. Just the volume of passes. He threw 47 passes. That's a tough ask against a swarming defense in Iowa. So I think, Illinois has a shot. They got to play an inspired Northwestern team. But again, they, after the start of their season, good on them to be in the position they are with all the losses that they've had on different sides of the ball. But I've got them at 10. All right, I'm going to rip my next team. The other 3 I'm not, because we kind of know who they are. Minnesota, what I don't understand, but it kind of felt like PJ Fleck didn't want to win. I get it. You're at a severe disadvantage, but like the Ohio State-Minnesota game played out a lot like the Ohio State-Indiana game. And in that game, it kind of felt like Tom Allen didn't want to win. It was just like, let's just get out of here with, the least amount of points on the board as possible. And that's what it kind of felt like with Minnesota. It was like, we're not really interested in scoring. We're just going to run the ball and run clock. And then they got down, And it's like, well, we got to throw, and then just disaster, right? I don't know what PJ Fleck's doing. I know he had a great season in 2019. At what point do you just kind of say he doesn't really add much? And I get it. Minnesota is down. Their offensive line is not what it was a year ago, but they're starting to get better. You've got a good stable of running backs. You've got some underrated receivers. Like, what's going on there? Brent Spanford, what has happened to him? Like, he has been a drop machine. And I just don't understand what is going on with that coaching staff, what is going on with that team. They have been just shockingly mediocre. And I think what's frustrating is for all the rah-rah, row your boat stuff that PJ Fleck does, he doesn't seem at all inspired to play these big games. And it almost feels like he showed up to collect a paycheck. Now, I don't want to insinuate that. But this is it's ridiculous. That it seemed like there was no effort to try to score. You had fourth and manageable on Ohio State's side of the field twice in this game in the first half, when it's still close. And instead of going for it, you try to pin them deep. What are you doing? Now, I can kind of get the logic if you are a power and you're like, I want to pin them deep, so But they weren't stopping them in between the 20s. Why on earth are you just giving the ball back just so that they can score more? It made no sense to me. So I don't understand Minnesota. They're at 10, or they're at 11. Michigan State's 12, 2 wins in the past 3 weeks. Good on them. Purdue at 13, tough luck with Hudson Card being out. And then Indiana at 14. They kind of round out my power rankings. Let me do my national top 10 real quick, and then I'll get you out of here. Number 1, Georgia. Georgia has turned it on, and they're a monster right now. I think they're the best team in the country, and I'm not sure it's close. 2, I've got Ohio State on the strength of their 2 big wins. 3, I have Washington. I just, Washington beat another top 12 team in Oregon State. I just don't know how you keep them down. I know that it's looked ugly at times, but, they keep winning against the teams you put in front of them. And it's a tough schedule. And so I've got Washington at 3. I've got Michigan at 4. And a lot of that's more on the backs of their schedule and how they have looked against teams that have a pulse, if I'm honest. I've got them at 4. I have Florida State at 5. I'm gutted for Jordan Travis. Let me be clear. If Florida State wins out and wins the ACC, they're in the playoff, regardless of what. Jordan Travis is out for the season, most likely. That did not look like a injury that he's coming back from. But Florida State's in the playoff if they win out. Okay? That's not a debate. So, number 6, I've got Alabama. I think Alabama has looked the best since week 7, week 8. They look really, really good right now. And I know Texas beat them, but teams change. And I think Alabama would beat Texas in a neutral site next week. So I've got Texas at number 7. Texas keeps winning even when it looks bad. They keep winning. Oregon I have at 8. Oregon looks the part, But then you kind of look at some of their wins and you're like, who have they actually beaten? And I think they look good. I think Bo Nix is good. But I don't know. I'm not convinced in Oregon like everybody else is. I've got Penn State at 9. I think that defense is nasty still. And I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of losing by one score to Ohio State and Michigan. I just don't. And I know that Penn State fans don't want to hear that. I know Penn State fans might want Franklin fired. I kind of think it might be time for him to go. But it's, firing Franklin at this point would be a luxury move, not a necessary move. And the only way it's necessary is if you think you can get somebody who can take you to that next level. Penn State routinely is in that 9 to 15 range, or 6 to 15 range. Like they are a really good team, and that defense is legit, right? They were legit against Ohio State. They were legit against Michigan. So I think all the teams that I just listed above them, I think Penn State would give them fits. And maybe outside of Georgia and Alabama, I'm not sure the defenses are would be as effective in stopping Penn State. So I think Penn State is a really good team. They're just in a tough spot right now. So and their offense, they need to improve offensively for sure. Last but not least, I've got Louisville at 10. They're 10-1. They have some good wins. They have a big win over Notre Dame. I think they're going to end up facing Florida State in the ACC championship game, and that could be really tough for Florida State because the way that Florida State is playing right now, especially with the Jordan Travis injury, that could be a really tough game for them. So, Louisville, really good season. Props to Jeff Brom, a former Purdue coach. But that'll do it. We're going to do picks on Wednesday because of Thanksgiving. I want to give you ample time because I know there's quite a few Friday games on the schedule. And so I think if you look, I think Penn State plays prime time. Yeah, they play prime time in Detroit against Michigan State on Friday night. That's a 7:30 kick. Lot of fun action on Friday. You've got the Apple Cup. No, not the Apple Cup. The Civil War. Oregon, future Big Ten future Big Ten member. You've got Iowa at Nebraska. You've got Penn State, Michigan State. Should be a very, very nice slate of games on Friday, which will lead us to Rivalry Saturday. And looking forward to it. So this has been the Big Ten Football Talk Podcast. Again, thanks for listening. Follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Take care. God bless.